such an enormously complex and challenging topic. Obviously, we deal with the huge issue of affordability, which we'll touch on tonight, but also just contested visions of the future and really what our residential future is in Los Angeles. This was the place where people came with the California dream. I would ask, what is happening to the California dream? Anyway, as shown in the exhibition, if any of you has not yet had a chance to go around it, it beautifully takes on issues of affordability, inclusion, showing how they are part of the fabric, the history of the city, dating back to its incorporation in the late 19th century. And also it shows that another thing that Santa Monica has led with is innovation, sort of innovation in ideas about living. And I think that has to be something that we should always be thinking about as well, because that does get to that reason so many people come here, which is, frankly, quality of life. So we're going to talk about the state of housing in Santa Monica, a little bit in the past, but mostly present and hopefully into the future. What are we dealing with? I mean, right now there is so much that's sort of coming at us. All the issues locally, but also this flurry of legislative zoning changes coming from the state, mandatory density bonuses, more housing on corridors, the legalization of ADUs, the whole battle around SB 9 and the splitting up of single-family lots. We've got the RENA numbers, the housing element, the builder's remedy, ballot measures coming up, like justice for renters. It goes on and on. It makes your head spin. And I feel the role, to the extent I have one, is trying to sort of unpack some of this for people who are curious but baffled. So all of this comes up against our own local needs and numbers. Please correct me if I'm wrong about any of these, all of you in the room. As I understand it, according to state mandates, Santa Monica is supposed to provide capacity for 9,000 housing units, 70% of them affordable. We've got seemingly plenty of market rate housing, but reportedly an 8% vacancy rate. We're not meeting our affordable housing needs. Thousands apply when an affordable unit opens up. There's the missing middle that earns too much to be eligible for subsidized housing, but can't pay the market rates. Santa Monica is so unaffordable, the majority of our workers, as I understand it, do not or are not able to live here, undermining any claim the city can have to be sustainable when you have such a separation between housing and work, or at least arguably. We have declining enrollment at the school district, which may go hand in hand with the declining or the out-migration of, especially of younger households looking for housing elsewhere. So anyway, and then we have other issues. We're a majority rental city, but there's a conversation about whether that's an issue in itself. Should we be trying to incentivize more opportunities for home ownership? So the questions, the challenges go on and on. Then there's the issue of what's being built. And like I said, I am personally come at this originally from the background of design and architecture. And so I'm very interested in what is our physical environment that we're creating. And right now there's so much development in downtown Santa Monica, along Lincoln, Wilshire. We have two representatives here of developers, non-profit, market rate, both developing on Lincoln, downtown Santa Monica, projects going on Wilshire. It's a very interesting moment if you think that every epoch is kind of marked by a concentration of a different kind of development. And right now we've got the development on the thoroughfares, and how's that going? And where will it go? Where will development go in the next few decades? So that's a lot to get through. It's just a few of the questions that I'm hoping we can touch on, but I'm not going to do too long of a Q&A. The idea is just to go for about 25 minutes with me and the guests, and then it's over to the floor for questions, because like we've already been told, there's 3 mayors in this room. Those 3 mayors know the history and the issues very, very well, along with everybody else that does too. Lastly, I just want to be very clear about my own connection to these issues. I have lived in Santa Monica since moving here in '91. I live in a rent-stabilized apartment in Ocean Park. My daughter went to John Muir Jams in Salmon High. I am, as I mentioned, a member of the board of Community Corporation of Santa Monica. I'm extremely proud of that, because I have admired Community Corp ever since being introduced to them by architect friends of mine who were working on their projects. And So I've admired them for a long time, and now I've got to know some of the folks behind those facades, and I learn something from them every day. There's at least 4 of them in this room, and I feel like I've got mum and dad, like here, to say, no, it's not like that. But anyway, having said that, I'm not here on behalf of Community Corp. I am here not to represent any side or stakeholder. I went to the University of Warren Olney for 15 years, and I learned from him neutrality and objectivity at all times. So that's my role tonight, and with that, I'm going to go to our people who are stakeholders and do have biases and quickly introduce them, and then we will get on with our conversation. So let's see, this is the order I have the list, but not the order they're sitting in. So we're going to jump straight to Denny, sitting right there. I think all of you in this room, all of you in this room know Denny.
Not everybody.
Well, those all the people that matter, and we may just have a test later to make sure people absorb. Anyway, one of the 3 mayors in this room grew up in the Inland Empire, studied philosophy, moved into organising, got Santa Monicans to approve rent control, passed in 79, held 3 terms on the council, including a term as mayor, helped formulate many of Santa Monica's affordable housing strategies. In 2007, founded Move LA to champion ballot measures to fund transit expansion and affordable housing. Now underway, he also led the coalition in the City of LA to formulate and pass Measure LA, also known as the mansion tax, to raise many millions, hopefully, to prevent, or rather that was the intention of the bill, to prevent homelessness and build affordable housing. He's currently working on the Justice for Renters Act, and you don't stop, do you, Denny?
Not yet.
So, Denny Zane, welcome, please. Round of applause. Next on my list is Jesús Hernández, Director of Housing for Affordable Housing Development Community Corporation. He's a man who lives up to his name. So kind, so kind. He spent, according to his bio, 11 years developing affordable housing, responsible for securing and developing approximately 860 units of affordable permanent supportive housing, oversees Community Corp's real estate department, including its construction opportunities and its rehabilitation of existing buildings, got his Bachelor of Arts in Sociology minor in Urban Planning from UCLA, with a special expertise in homeless individuals with mental illness. So please welcome Jesús. And then the person has to negotiate between everybody. At the city, Jing Yeo, manager of the City Planning Division for the City of Santa Monica, directs a broad array of development review and strategic planning activities, including community plans, housing policy implementation, development review, historic preservation and design review, study of planning at the University of Toronto. Hello, Jing. Welcome, Jing. But absolutely not least, also known to many of you in this room, Bruce Fairty, Chief Operating Officer at Cypress Equity Investments, one of the biggest developers in Santa Monica, as I understand it. You joined Cypress Equity 35 years ago, you spent 35 years as the COO, working on multifamily real estate development, building 35,000 units throughout the country, correct? Currently headquartered in Brentwood, but zeroed in on Santa Monica, developing more than 2,200 units here, with more than half a dozen new apartment buildings now planned or under construction, as well as buildings out there in the city of Los Angeles. So welcome all of you. Market rate, non-profit, politics, and planning. So pretty much all sides. Anybody who's left out here in the ecosystem? Residents? Resident. I'm the resident.
I'm a resident.
You're a resident. Okay, well you've just nicely set up the first question, which is the softball. The softball, which is, what does Santa Monica mean to you? Like, sort of, if you live here, if you do, what's the type of housing you admire? What's the type of housing that you're kind of really deeply engaged with here?
Who's that town to?
Well, I was looking at you, Bruce.
So that's the question again was?
Just this exhibition here is about the history of housing in Santa Monica. So just quick softball question.
Okay.
What housing here do you admire? What means something to
I mean,
you?
I admire all of it. I think we should look more of it.
Okay. Okay, set up for our next question, which is how? Jing?
I think your question was like, is it, to me, Santa Monica is home. I've actually been a resident here for 18 years. It's where both my children were born. You know, I'm actually Canadian. I grew up in Canada, but I've been here long enough that this is home now. And as in public service here for 18 years, you know, I've had, I guess, that perspective now of seeing, you know, when I first arrived in 2006 to today, how much the city has developed and changed over that time. And, you know, what we're seeing now, I think, compressed in the last 4 years is a whole lot more change, I think, than that at least I've seen when I came in the early part of your career, and just the conversations we're having around, you know, housing, what housing means, you know, how, you know, what it means for our city, how it's changing the urban landscape. You know, is really, I think, where we're at right now.
Right.
It's quite a conversation.
Has been very intense. Denny?
So when I think about Santa Monica, where I've lived almost 50 years, I really don't think that much about the housing. I think more about the people. Housing is obviously really important for people. And having them be able to afford and be secure in the housing is really important. When I first moved here, Santa Monica had a more diverse character economically than it does now. I really found that diversity to be a very appealing and not only engaging fact, because it seemed as if the diversity of interest in, you know, it wasn't just a single class, it was multiple classes of people, economically speaking. And I really thought that provided a vibrancy, something to protect, something to aspire to. And so most of my political life here has been about both protecting that diversity or trying to find strategies to enable more low-income people to live here as well, because I feel like low-income people are clearly being forced out, not just Santa Monica, but all of Southern California, frankly. And that's very lamentable to me.
Thanks, Danny. I think for me, what Santa Monica means to me is that at one point this was where I lived. We rented here for a couple of years up until COVID, which I appreciate, you know, my time here, and I'm still obviously a community corp. But I think when I think about Santa Monica, I think about the diversity that I experienced in the Pico neighborhood. I think it's still very diverse, economically, socially. Had neighbors who were from Latin America and only spoke Spanish, but in Santa Monica. So it's cool to have that discussion with folks. Like, how is this still possible? But it still exists in certain pockets of the city. So that's what I appreciate most about, in terms of what Santa Monica meant to me when I lived here, is the diversity in the Pico neighborhood.
So there's two of you that's brought up diversity, economic diversity, racial diversity, and I think it's something that actually probably is a shared value in this room. But if we've got this whole basket of measures, policy measures, pieces of legislation that are sort of trying to crack the nut of maintaining that diversity, because we don't have it anymore. It's not just the difficulty of reaching the very low income and affordable, but it's also the missing middle. That is something that there's an exodus in Santa Monica. I mean, when our daughter was at Samo, the turnover of teachers was constant because they just would give up because they have to drive in from San Bernardino or Burbank or something to come and teach. So you sort of saw it in real time, this just dribbling away of people who did want to form a family here. So of all the various efforts, is it all of the above, like we've got to do all of the above, or is there sort of something particular that could? And
if I could just interrupt to maybe speak on, because I brought some boards on. People put them together, so I better use them, because people are married. But,
you really do have boards?
Oh, good. So as to the point of diversity, I mean, that's a very real taking point. we actually had a study done, and it's a very real phenomenon. In Santa Monica in 2010, we had 24,000, can you see this? I'll read it out. We had 24,000 plus households making below $75,000 a year of household income. By 2022, when people got raises, I know, but there's been a loss of that amount of money in people at these income cohorts. So the thing we're talking about your point about losing diversity is absolutely in the numbers. And in fact,
So those income numbers,
I'm sorry?
are the income numbers adjusted?
They're not. This is going down. And then a little bit more granularity to it just speaks about the income cohorts at which there's been an exodus from Santa Monica. Those are the numbers in the red. And then these are the incomes that Santa Monica is gaining. So everything that we're sitting here talking about is demographically true.
And that's true of the county as a whole as well. Santa Monica is probably the beachhead, or maybe where some of that phenomenon is most amplified, but it's characteristic of the entire county. Oddly, we have some of our most evident displays of poverty, while our median incomes and the numbers of people who are higher income has dramatically increased. So the paradox is, in the middle of our highest prosperity, we have our worst poverty. That's a paradox.
So then you asked me a question. So my answer is I'm all of the above for housing. I'm a affordable housing. I do a lot. My company does a lot of affordable housing. We have 5 offices around the country. We do development across the U.S. And so we do lots of tax credit. I know Jesús Hernández. We've talked about trying to do some projects together. We do our own tax credit low income projects around the country. We do missing middle in other parts of the country where that's possible. And we do market rate as well. So I'm very much a supply matters a lot, and supply at every income cohort matters.
And why can't you do missing the middle here?
Because anything below pure market rate needs a subsidy of some form. I mean, all the work that Jesús does, it's great work that he and Tara do, is dependent upon tax credit financing by and large. And so in California, tax credits are oversubscribed 3.5 to 1. So there are 3.5 to 1 projects units looking to get funded compared to the actual availability of it. So we don't build enough affordable housing because we don't have enough subsidy. Missing middle is just another point on that continuum. Missing middle doesn't pay enough rent to allow for new apartments to be built. So how is it being done? So I'm doing missing middle projects in Texas and doing them in Florida. Both have sort of property tax exemptions that come with restricting incomes to between 80 and 120 of AMI, and generally that's considered to be the missing middle. So the way other states are solving that is by granting, in the case of Florida, 75, or we do a lot of work, and have an office, a 75% property tax exemption, and in the case of Texas, 100% property tax exemption in exchange for maintaining income rents at that 80 to 120 of AMI. So that's not possible here in California, but it's being done elsewhere in the country. That's how it's being done.
Now, I think you pointed on your board to the fact that a certain median wage had dropped, I think, relative to rents. And I think you pointed out that the jobs that
well, people have left Santa Monica because Santa Monica has become too expensive. I mean,
right, and so I understand. I think, Denny, you're the cohort that believes that actually there isn't. Well, I shouldn't speak for you. Is it true that there is a kind of argument out there that we actually have enough housing out there, we have enough market rate housing, what we don't have enough of is incomes at the level of the market rate. So it's actually the incomes that one needs to address as much as the housing. Is that something that you have argued?
Well, no, but I think there is a truth there, and especially for lower income working families, that the ability to afford to live, not just Santa Monica, but broadly, Los Angeles County, even Southern California, that income increases, like, for example, increases in minimum wage or negotiated increases in the workforce, is very, very important for those that workforce to be able to afford. But but the housing costs in the county and the region largely outstrip even that income level. And we need to, I think, do principally two things, I think. And subsidy is certainly one of them. And one of the reasons why I feel very critical of the state and the governor's policies through the arena and others is that they provided no money to, we've got 6,000 mandate on affordable units and 3,000 on market rate. We're probably going to shortly, in half the period, have triple the market rate development that we're required, but we received no help from the state to address the affordable. And people say, well, just build more market rate in order to, have an inclusionary share be for the lower income. Well, if you do that, then you literally have to double the number of units in the city. And I don't think there are advocates out there, even the YIMBYist advocate, who thinks that's a good idea. So if we don't have...
Yeah, Bruce is the YIMBYist advocate.
Okay.
What do you think? Double?
I don't want to, I'd like Denny to be
Well, so I think that the other part is that one of the reasons why we've lost a lot of affordable housing is because the state adopted a policy called vacancy decontrol, which means rent controlled housing, when somebody moves out, goes to market. It literally means that a vacant unit anywhere in California goes to market, right? If you are a low-income person, even a moderate, low-mod income person, finding a vacant place in California that you can afford is very difficult. None of them are controlled at that level. And I think that's really been a mistaken policy, that yes, we need to ensure that property owners have a fair return, but vacancy decontrol is creating really very significant enhancements in return unnecessarily, and we're losing our affordable housing stock as well as a result.
One could really spend the next half hour debating rent control, actually. That could be its own topic, because it's obviously there are obviously...
I do believe.
But Jesús, do you agree that...
Well, I mean, for us as affordable housing developers, despite kind of the updates I give the board once a month, my job could be easy. I think it's made a lot easier if there's subsidies available, but when there isn't, then we're like having to figure out other routes that we can't operate in normal market conditions. It's just not a feasible pathway for affordable housing. We need deep subsidies because the rents we collect are way below market. They won't cover operations, property taxes, insurance are obviously going through the roof. So we need deep subsidies from the city, basically where we're not required to provide a payment on the loan, like a mortgage required. So the typical housing that we build has subsidies of up to 60%. Which means no debt service on that portion of the loans that are forgivable from the city, but when that's not available, we just can't develop. And I think in Santa Monica, that's happening currently. We have a pipeline of 12 to 13 development sites. 1 or 2 are in Santa Monica. So we have to, for good and bad as developers, we have to go where the money's at, and right now it's not Santa Monica. And so for us, advocacy is important, right? Working with cities and policies around what can we do to increase the stock of dollars for us to continue to do our business. But obviously COVID was a big hit, and other issues that hit Santa Monica. So we're here as a partner with the city, but until there are dollars for this type of housing, we just unfortunately can't focus on Santa Monica at the moment, despite our long history of developing almost 2,000 units in our 42-year history.
And there's dollars, and is there also land? And this is a question for Jing. I mean, as you and your team at the city, what tools do you have? And well, you tell me.
Yeah, I mean, we just came out of a 3-4 year process, on getting a certified 6-cycle housing element. And that's an exercise every single city in California has to go through to show that you can accommodate a certain number of housing units. And as you said, we were asked to plan for 9,000. through a number of wonky rules, we actually ended up having to plan for something like 13,000 ultimately. You know, and I think one of the frustrating things as planners is we were going through this exercise was like, what is the reality of this? Because, you know, when you sort of add the numbers up on, you know, how much funding is necessary to support all of this housing, you know, the 7,000 affordable housing units that we had to show, look, we have the zone capacity, but I think one thing, you know, that we have to remember is like cities don't build housing, right? We are not developers. All we can do is create the regulatory system. We have tools. Santa Monica is very fortunate that we have a local housing trust fund, you know, that we can support affordable housing. Historically, we have, you know, going forward, it's a little more tenuous, you know, it's certainly not in the way we're able to do it historically, but, you know, in terms of the tools the city has from a policymaking perspective, increasingly, and I think this is where the state is at, you know, is probably a recognition that there is more need and demand out there than any public agency can support, and that's where the private market kind of has to come in and fill that void. And like, you know, one of the, I think, most game-changing state laws that is, you know, really having great effect right now is state density bonus law that is, it appears to be where all the eggs are being thrown right now, you know, because any public agency, like I said, Santa Monica is unique. We are not like every city in California. Most of them do not have any of the resources that we do to support affordable housing or the production of it in the way that we do. And so the reliance on the private market to bring housing, you know, online and to provide the affordable units in that way, you know, this, in many cities, that is what they rely on. You know, we're just fortunate to be able to even talk about putting our own dollars, and, you know, our residents have been willing to tax themselves time over time to support that. But it is a frustrating exercise to go through, planning, you know, creating the regulatory system, removing all the barriers to housing, and then you get to the end and it's like, okay, the thing we're missing is actually the money, you know, someone to make it happen.
Right, so Santa Monicans have regularly taxed themselves too, but they're not super keen on density bonuses, they're not super keen on, and there's a lot of pushback when projects come online that are very dense, and in fact you can speak to that. You've had some projects that come online that are very dense and I think are using density bonuses.
100%.
And you're facing a lot of pushback. I mean,
Yes and no, and look, it's the new state regime, it's the new state law, and everything that my company is doing, all the development that we're doing, has been enabled by the people we send to Sacramento. I mean, there's a lot of different opinions about what's created housing unaffordability, what role does supply have in solving that. The people we send to Sacramento have been clear, they think that a big part of the solution is to create more housing. I know that's not a popular point of view, but not coming from just a private developer. These are what our state elected representatives in Sacramento have concluded as well. So, and that's ultimately, again, I'll come back to, there's two different models in the country. We have parts of the country, and I built in, where the solution to housing affordability is just built on. And we have places in the country where that's not the case. It just was published that the Dallas-Fort Worth SMA, which I think has like 7.5 million people, is building more apartment housing in 2020, just finished more apartment housing in 2023 than the entire state of California built in its entirety. I mean, you don't build, if you don't think that new additional housing supply is going to have an impact on prices, that's a whole different discussion. I'm happy to have that as well. But the base is that we don't build much housing in California, and we don't build much housing in Santa Monica. I have some boards I could go with too.
We're very eager to see your boards.
I'm sure you are.
Just yes or no, do you think Santa Monica or indeed California should upzone more broadly? Do you think we've concentrated development in rather confined areas?
I personally don't.
So, at the YIMBY point of view, I think, or the supply side point of view, would say that if you just fill the market with new housing, lots of supply, and then there's a glut, then the rents will come down. So, as I understand it, there's something of a 8 to 10% vacancy rate currently in Santa Monica. Does that mean we might start to see the rents come down?
Well, I have some statistics. So, I brought Austin and Santa Monica. I have some data. The city of Austin is 2.5 million people and built 60,000 housing units from 2021 to 2024. Rents have declined by 8% in Austin, Texas.
You might have got you can leave it there.
I also have it for Santa Monica. Santa Monica, since 2021, has built 566 units,
How many people in Santa Monica?
90,000.
As I understand it, our population slightly dropped actually.
Well, our rents are up by about $150 as well.
I'm just looking, I'm just comparing
Yeah.
Austin to
Yeah.
Santa Monica population.
And they've got 2.5 million. They've got 2.5 million and how many units?
60,000.
And we've got about 90,000 people.
About 100 for easy.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
I'm a little concerned about those numbers because I'm not sure they're accurate. You know, in Santa Monica, we have a piece of legislation called Prop R. Back in 1990, we put on the ballot, and it requires that 30% of all the units built every year would be affordable to people at or below the median income. So the city keeps track of that and publishes a chart. When I looked at it recently, between up till 23, this fiscal year, so fiscal year 23, there had been something like 6,700 units built since 95, right? And now if you look at going forward from that, if you look at what's been built and what's been approved and what's under construction, and now what's being applied for about almost 3,000 units worth of application, about 3,000 units that are since that time frame have either been built, under construction, or approved. So we are now in a moment from like 23 forward, yes, I believe it's 23 forward, February 24 forward, where we are 6,000 units that have been either under construction, either built under construction, or approved, or applied for. We are facing now an extraordinary moment of increase in the city, an extraordinary moment of increase. All right, so if Austin is 2.5 million and we're 100,000, that's
25x.
That's 250 or 25 times more.
I think 25, but I'm not the math.
Anyway, if you multiply that 6,000, you would find that our housing production is dramatically more than what Austin's is.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with, that's just a point of difference. And I agree with that.
But anyway, your point is that in Austin, there's less constraints. I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Do you agree with these numbers? And I don't want to spend too long on
Well, this is
You can look at it.
Yeah, oh, another board.
the city has a call it dashboard.
Right. Well, Jing, you're at the city. Just which of these scenarios sounds plausible to you? But the point is, it doesn't matter if you crunch the numbers and say we've got a glut. We don't seem to have a glut because we're not meeting the need. You're just saying that by doing the numbers, it looks like we should be building a lot, but it's not meeting the need.
Well, it's meeting the need is, I mean, part of the issue here is, I think, is that when one thinks about a supply increase, yielding a decline in price, do you mean locally or do you mean regionally? And so here in Santa Monica, even though we have been building a lot, our prices are going up and up and up. I mean, our median rent for units that have been vacancy decontrolled at least once is about $2,500. And our median rent for units that haven't been is about a little over $1,000. But the median rent for newly occupied vacant units is about $2,800. So our rents are going up, and we're building. They're not all built yet, but many of them are underway. And I don't think we're seeing anything remotely like a decline in rents.
Oh, that's
as a
what,
consequence.
yeah. That's exactly. I was wondering myself if there would be a decline in rents, but
There may be in the Inland Empire or something, but not locally.
So I'd like to, I hear this a lot as a developer, because people challenge what I do. We're building a lot of housing. We're talking about building a lot of housing, but we have not built a lot of housing. So, and this number, we talk about numbers, this number actually comports, I was telling Jim inside, within 100 units. This actually comports with one of the exhibits there. So in 1980, there were 47,700 housing units, and this is all housing units, single family rental as well. So we've added 4,500, so from to the city's history, we used to build this much housing every decade. And we started building this much housing every decade. So since 1980 to 2023, we've built 4,500 housing units. It's about 100 units a year. So that's been the supply. So we talk about what's happened to rents with all this new housing. It hasn't been built. It's talking about being built, and it will be built, but it's not been built yet. And so the rents that have occurred, the rent increases that have occurred in Santa Monica have occurred with that kind of housing production. Not any big pop that's going to be forthcoming. That's what we've actually built.
So really, what Julie was describing earlier about seeing sort of in the last sort of 10 years, a real kind of like sudden burst, is that corresponding with the numbers that you're?
Yeah, I mean, it is, I think, over that temporal perspective, and it was part of one of our many presentations on the housing element. If you look back over, not just, like through 80s, from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and that probably corresponds almost exactly with, there was a 1984 land use and circulation element that represented probably, I would say, a downscaling of what you could do in the city as a reaction to, many of the towers you see people ask, like, how did that happen on Ocean Avenue? Like, why is that a giant
The two
building?
towers that were going to be
and you see some of those buildings that were built like pre-1980 that exist today, but what has happened in the city since 84 through to now, there was definitely like a sort of tampering down of development potential throughout the city as a reaction to what had happened, through the 60s and 70s.
right, which is when we see Community Corp and other non-profits start to form themselves, actually in sort of intervening at around that moment.
Right.
I mean, I have heard a very interesting phrase that from developers actually. The most affordable housing is the market rate housing that you built 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But that might maybe is a different way of looking at housing from.
I don't mean to monopolize the conversation, but it just happened to be. So I started in the business in 1983 in Orlando, Florida. Built a lot of units there. I was in Orlando 5 weeks ago, and coming out of the airport, I went by one of the very first projects I built was 1983. Sundown Apartments in Summer on Trail in Orlando, Florida. Built it in 1983. It was new, luxury, top of the market rents when I built it in 1983. It's 40 years older. That's housing the workforce people right now because it's aged.
And is it rent controlled?
It is not rent controlled. But that's another part of my thesis here is we didn't build the housing in the 80s. We didn't build the housing in the 90s. We didn't build the housing in the aughts. It's right there. We haven't built it. And so we never created that naturally aging, and therefore the cohorts of housing ages that would become more affordable as they age. We don't have that here. We stopped building in 1980. And my thesis is let's not continue to make that same mistake. The housing we build today is expensive, top of the market rents today. That housing will be more affordable in 20 years, 30 years, and 40 years. That's way down the road. And if we had all the money we had to build all the affordable housing, Jesus had the money to build all the affordable housing that he possibly could, I'd sit around and applaud and go work and help the builders. But we don't. We all know that we don't have that money. So how do we create housing when we can't create enough affordable housing? What do we do? Nothing.
Jesus?
No, certainly. I think the viewpoint from us is that the housing that we create brings about the housing that's affordable, for the life of the project. And we can't wait 30 years to solve the issue of housing crisis. People are leaving the city, diversity is leaving the city. The school districts are losing population. We can't wait 30 years for that. There's opportunities, I think, to be made, but I think just the way the market itself is not advantageous for our work, but I think there's government interventions that I think can help produce affordable housing.
Well, I mean, one of the ways we can produce affordable housing is to increase taxes and pay for it, or adopt bonds and pay for it, both of which require voter approval. Fortunately, we're in a moment when we can win those taxes and those bonds with majority votes. That's very, very important. If it's 2/3 like the advocates of Prop 13 wanted, then we probably would not be able to pass any of them. We used to have, before Jerry Brown made big changes, we used to have a tool. We had redevelopment, where every city could utilize tax increment financing to do improvements in their community, economic development improvements. But they had to spend 20% of it on affordable housing. Now, that opportunity has been lost. Cities are not creating of their own revenues to use for affordable housing like they used to. Now, that was an economic crisis moment, and I think Governor Brown made a mistake to have changed redevelopment, that things would be a lot better now. We should have then solved the economic crisis then with more broadly based tax increases, just as we should be doing that now in the state of California. Instead, we're cutting back on the very things we should be investing in, which is affordable housing and climate change. I think it's very lamentable that in our state, the political fear, or the fear of politicians of proposing to raise taxes, has stymied really our ability to address our needs. The people aren't afraid to do that. People are, community members are voting for taxes, right? Why are the politicians so afraid of it? They don't want to be identified with it. And that's a really lamentable outcome. If that were to be overcome, we could have the kind of money we need for real affordable housing programs in every community. And by the way, there will be a tax on the ballot, a sales tax measure on the ballot this year, this November, for affordable housing in Los Angeles County. We ought to all support it.
Should we all?
Measure A, we expect.
We've got to actually throw it open to the floor momentarily, so just before we do, I just want to spend a few minutes actually just on the kind of physical expression of everything that we're talking about. So right now, we're obviously not meeting all the affordability needs, but as Jim has pointed out, there's a lot being built right now. We're all aware of it. It does seem to be going up very fast, and it is denser, and there's height, and the builder's element stepped in, and we maybe have even more height, and we've got a concentration of development. All of a sudden, a lot of it on a boulevard that 15 years ago was the ugliest street in Los Angeles, arguably Lincoln Boulevard. And now Lincoln Boulevard is where development is being concentrated. I find it completely fascinating, having walked, or rather avoided, Lincoln as much as possible because it was really so unpleasant. So you've got market rate developments, we've got lovely buildings like Community Court, the Arroyo, we've got now the Wilson going up, we've got your project at Gelson's, which brought out, has stimulated quite a reaction, to say the least. We've got your project going up at the Vaughan site. I mean, it goes on and on.
That's not my project.
Oh, that's yours, sorry.
I'm across the street.
You're across the street, excuse me, you're one across the street from the old one. So anyway, we're starting to see this kind of linear, I don't want to call it a city, it's not a city, but it's a sort of linear, it's like a big fat steroidal strip of buildings. And this is where Santa Monicans are now going to be living, like by Lincoln Boulevard, maybe 5 or 6 rows of traffic, lots of pollution. It's not necessarily the ideal site, but there's financial reasons for building there. But in terms of, is this the dream Santa Monica that we want to build? And how are you as developers, designers, transit thinkers, Denny, that's very much your role, planners, how are we making this the best it can be?
I mean, what you're seeing now actually is by design. So it was deliberate to concentrate any new development in really about 3% of the city. So the sort of trade-off was, there's a need. I always see it as a balance of production and preservation, right? A core value of Santa Monica is housing preservation. That meant not touching any of our neighborhoods. 33% of Santa Monica is our R1 neighborhood. The rest of it is a lot of our multifamily neighborhoods where all the rent control housing largely is. And, you know, it's a trade-off of, we didn't want any like displacement of existing tenants, you know, certainly protecting people where they are. And so where was change gonna happen? It was gonna happen on these commercial boulevards. The Expo line is sort of the spine that runs through the city. And so the 2010 Land Use Recirculation Element Update, what's happening now is very much in line with that vision that was set forth in 2010 in terms of building kind of these denser communities, you know, on these commercial boulevards where if growth is going to happen, it's going to happen close to transit, and it's going to happen to where the services are available, and sort of creating the sense of like a 15-minute city. You know, Santa Monica is on a grid, and it makes it sort of, you know, despite I think some of the concerns around congestion, what have you, it is remarkably easy to get around. And you can, there's not sort of these, I mean, I used to work in the Coachella, like, you know, like when you sort of have this giant highway that runs in and you don't have, you know, you gotta get on this road, everyone's got to do this one road to get, you know, to where you wanna go. On a grid, there's sort of multiple options, you know, for people to drive, to walk, to ride your bike. I think anyone who lives in Santa Monica kind of values that. When you go to LA, you sort of lose that experience, you know, to some degree. You know, so what we're seeing now in terms of the location of where the development is very much was set forth in that general plan update. I think what's different is the scale of it. You know, that was truly unanticipated. I mean, nobody could have seen what the state did 2017 going forward. You know, that has, I think, increased the scale far beyond what any of us ever imagined. You know, at the time that was set forth, and I think we're very much grappling, you know, with how to make these buildings fit. You know, what we have right now, because they are all by right, as long as you follow zoning, they're approved. They do get better through the design review process. People see somebody who's going for this, guys, but you know, when it comes in the door and when it, you know, when it leaves the city, it definitely is a better project, I think, having gone through the design review process. You know, in terms of where the change is happening, that's actually exactly where it was supposed to happen.
Right, although not to nitpick, wasn't one of the places where it was supposed to happen also the Expo line, which would have been the completely natural place, and then we had the Hines development, which would have been a precursor to that kind of development, which was killed. And so now it appears most of the development is actually on Lincoln, where we don't have an Expo line.
Right. But it was sort of like the commercial corridor view, so it wasn't just the Expo,
Right.
it was Wilshire, Santa Monica, Broadway, Colorado, Lincoln.
Yeah, Expo was one of the drivers of you know, appropriate location. The downtown itself was I think a destination for where the city wanted to have greater development than elsewhere. Both because we wanted to revive the downtown. You may recall the old mall before it was the Promenade was, you know, 30% vacancy and almost nobody was there most of the time. And so, you know, we did bring it back to life again. We always anticipated that we would want people living in the downtown area, and that was a key strategy for ensuring the longevity of the Promenade. And so we zoned for that, but we didn't zone for 18 and 24 stories. We zoned, you know, for 8 or 9 stories, and in a few places for 12 stories at 3 locations. But now, because of state law, we're getting 18-story and 24-story. We never zoned for that. That's really an imposition that goes beyond what we, I think, anticipated or wanted even there. And the same is true along the Expo corridor. It's, yes, that's where you want to grow. Location, we got it right, and Lincoln included. But I think the scale of it is much more than what we planned for and wanted, and I think much more than what the community wants.
Well, got it right in terms of fulfilling that need to not encroach on the R1s if one considers that.
Not just the R1s, I'm talking about the multifamily neighborhoods.
And the multifamily.
The very interesting thing about rent control is that it told all the renters that you live here too and you matter. So let's remember the multifamily neighborhoods matter also, equally to the R1s.
I live in one and I love it. So I can attest to that, to that particular, the way in which renters are definitely elevated in Santa Monica where they're not in other Southern California cities necessarily. Albeit there's a whole conversation to be had about home ownership, which I don't want to get into right this very second. I want to stay with, this is the beach city. What kind of sort of built environment, what kind of quality of life are we creating? There's way, when you do live, let's think about the residents. You're a resident, you are now living on Lincoln Boulevard. You have traffic flying past you the whole time. The air quality levels are not as lovely as in Sunset Park. What do you do as a developer or as a designer to make that for the low-income folks in a community court building, for the higher-income folks in one of your buildings? How do you make this? Let's not worry about the neighbors who don't like it. Let's think about the residents themselves. Who lives there? Will a family live there? Will it be a place to call home?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, building high density on Lincoln Boulevard and Wilshire Boulevard and Santa Monica Boulevard is hardly revolutionary in the context of the development that's gone on in the country. Manhattan, Boston, DC, I mean, Dallas, I mean, I'll just keep listing off cities. I mean, this condition exists everywhere. And as developers, and Jing knows this as well, I mean, there are codes and there are requirements that we have to go through. Title 21, nobody here knows what Title 21 is, but some people do, but not everybody does. And so Title 21 talks about indoor noise, and so I have to test and hire acoustical consultants for indoor noise. We have to do it for air quality, the whole bit. And so there are mechanisms in place for projects that are located next to high traffic areas. But again, this is hardly revolutionary in the country. The other thing I'd say in terms of all the cars that go by, we touched on climate change. Denny touched on climate change before. I mean, I hear various numbers in the city, 60,000 people, 80,000, 100,000 people a day commute into Santa Monica. I don't know the exact number, but it's a lot of people. And so, I mean, I'd like Jim to speak to this, but I mean, one of the core planning principles is jobs, housing, balance. And so I think there's a case to be made that we are not doing all that we can be doing for our climate by making people commute from so far away and not bringing housing closer to the jobs. I mean, Jim, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, we have, more than, our population swells to, at least over double the size for people commuting in. And, I think part of the work around creating housing is, creating opportunities for people to live here who work here. People will choose to live wherever they want to live for a variety of different reasons, right? You might build a unit for someone, they might still choose to live in Burbank. That's their choice. But trying to find a place for everybody, is I think one of the nuts, that we crack, from a policy making perspective of, are you providing units of all typologies at various income levels? It's hard to pinpoint, like the need is everywhere. And when that's the case, it's, from a policy-making perspective, I think all we look at is trying to, what can we do to reduce the barriers, what can we do to, but also put in place what our values are in terms of, expectations for unit mix, what are the kinds of, units that we want to see, what income levels, we communicate that. But I think, the imposition of state law is something that is not small right now, because a lot of those things, like unit mix, can be waived away because of state law. And we do see it pretty regularly, on projects, but that's sort of the balance, that we're in right now, where to make a project feasible, a developer is making those trade-offs, to make the project pencil, and it is providing, some measure of affordable units. And those are the tools that are available.
I apologize. I have people texting me all over crazy. I have to respond, so.
You do your thing, because I want Jesus to answer anyway.
No, to the first part of the question, Francis, we only build buildings that are all electric. So in terms of indoor air quality, that's key to the type of housing that we provide for residents, that take out the gas, all electric buildings, a lot more clean air, indoor quality. So from that perspective, that's one of the measures that we do, despite having built on Lincoln 2 projects recently, the Aurelio and also Pacific Landing, just south of Pico. But I think from a macro perspective, as we look at housing for the folks that we build, we only build in high income neighborhoods, right? I think that is a way for us to break the cycle of poverty for folks who haven't been able to live in communities like Santa Monica. So that's important for the work that we do, for the livability of cities, for the diversity of cities, for, I mentioned earlier about breaking the cycle of poverty for folks who have been pigeonholed in other low-income neighborhoods. So that's really the benefit that we provide, I think, to residents, is to provide this kind of housing and continue to want to do in Santa Monica is important for us still.
Yeah, no, absolutely, no question there. It's more the low-income families who are living in the Arroyo. You know, it does become a really interesting design challenge to really make it the best it can be. You know, which arguably it is. But what's very interesting, maybe I shouldn't belabor this point because maybe it's just me and I'm just curious, sort of myself, how this is going to emerge, kind of design-wise. But currently what's happening on Lincoln is one's getting these kind of self-contained, fairly dense projects that are currently, you know, positioned at some distance from each other. But over time, it's going to start to fill in. And I guess what I'm wondering is are we going to be seeing tree canopy put in? Are we going to be seeing street improvements that start to knit it together as a real destination, as a real physical piece of Santa Monica that has a character and a kind of urban condition? Is that what comes next as we see the infill projects go in there?
Well, it should. I mean, Santa Monica probably distinguishes itself for its tree canopy, if you look at the community as a whole. So the boulevards that are targets for new development should be part of that same tradition. It just takes investment. And so that might mean a bond or some other type of voter-approved resource, but you know, you do have to, and it's an important part of fighting climate change and fighting the urban heat island effect in our cities. So we should be doing that. And hopefully we'll get ourselves in a position fiscally soon so that we can more easily, I think, convince the voters to support that.
So I think historically, yes, I mean, the city has undertaken like streetscape projects, you know, the Transit Mall in Santa Monica Boulevard is an example. There is examples of sort of like smaller scale, water retention basins, swales on like Wilson Place in Ocean Park. You know, there's example projects like that, but on Lincoln anyways, there's a Lincoln Neighborhood Corridor project. It's partially funded. You know, so you're seeing some of the sort of critical safety improvements go in, but there's a broader overall plan, you know, that looks at improving the pedestrian experience. And that, I mean, from a planning perspective, you know, we only have so much control over what happens on private property ultimately. But you know, from an urban design perspective of what happens between buildings and in the public right of way, yes, absolutely, that's, you know, sort of the city's realm, if you will. And there is, you know, urban forest master plan, you know, that has trees selected for each tree well, and you know, there's tree canopy that is planned throughout the city. You know, and as projects are built, they are required to plant those trees that are on their frontage. But you know, I think the city doesn't have a maybe great history of sort of having like road dedications, if you will, you know, for widening of roads, or, you know, not to widen more traffic lanes, but to widen it for sidewalk purposes. So
Right.
At least in the downtown, when we did the downtown community plan, one of the things we did require is on the ground floor, there's sort of a building setback that is required. This is getting a little technical, but the whole idea behind it was, you know, you see throughout downtown, there's lovely outdoor dining, lots of use of public sidewalks, and the idea was to accommodate that on the ground floor. So to the extent that we could not require any private property owner, like, you know, hey, give us 10 feet of your property, you know, and dedicate it for a sidewalk, we'll set your building back on the ground floor so that it, you know, to accommodate that future outdoor dining, and so it retains the sort of like 8 to 12 foot sidewalk that's already there for public purpose. That was the intent.
And to give an example to what we're both speaking about, so I sit on the board of Downtown Santa Monica Inc., and so there's a Lincoln Boulevard improvement plan that was adopted last year. And so we're going to be, in fact, the city and DTSM, with some of the tax increment financing that we collect, we're going to be making an improvement, physical improvements to Lincoln, with signage and tree lighting and a bunch of stuff between Olympic and
John Wilshire and the freeway, I think.
yes, exactly. So that is what you're speaking about. So yes, that is an improvement. That's a multi-year, because the funding happens over multiple years, but that's the vision, absolutely. It's to tie all that together.
But keep in mind, I don't think any city is in a position to plant mature trees. And that's what creates the canopy, is the mature trees. So when you think about canopy on these boulevards, you think about growing into it, not having it appear magically.
What I was trying to, I guess, build on your point there, Denny, is I guess we've sort of been caught by surprise, actually. Talking of things happening magically, we've had this state density bonuses that sort of came at us by surprise, and now we have an urban fabric that is kind of emerging, that we slightly have to figure out a way to sort of resolve or integrate into the urban fabric. It seems, for all the challenges that are very real, that you have all laid out in terms of the affordability, just sort of what is happening now and what it means for the experience of Santa Monica is, I think, worth thinking about as well, even if affordability is the biggest issue in the room. And with that, sorry, slightly run over here, let us turn it over to you at the back.
Thanks. Sean Landris, I'm a planning commissioner here. I actually want to ask you to talk about some of the, and this is for everybody, talk about some of the things that you haven't addressed. I think, Denny, you alluded to the broken tax structure in California, and clearly there have been some efforts, whether it's the absence of commercial property tax reform or the complete disaster that is sales tax on goods in a declining goods market and no sales tax on services. There have been those conversations as well. We have what is it? Feast and famine here in California. We're in a famine year. But what about all the stuff that's not under our control? Interest rates, labor costs, commodity costs. We are in an environment where we can design, as Jing said, we can write the rules, but to your point about density bonuses, Francis, I was talking to some people the other week who said even the 100% state density bonus that has come in simply doesn't pencil, because by the time you're getting to that kind of height on a parcel with the setbacks, you're into high-rise construction, you're into you're into a very different building model. So I'm wondering what you're seeing in the things that are outside of our control that are contributing in the current moment to our success or our not success in this current crisis.
Address that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the issue too.
Interest rates, because this gets asked a lot. So there's no expectation actually that interest rates are going to come down.
Exactly.
Right. So there's a financial futures market that does bid and ask for interest rates out to 2034. And so the market, the multi-trillion-dollar financial market, is projecting that in 2034, interest rates will actually be higher than they are today. So what we've had over the last 10 years is not typical interest rates. They are historically low. What we have today are not abnormally high. They're normal. And this is the new normal. So when I'm having this conversation with policymakers, I say we're not going to get bailed out by reduced interest rates. So that's one comment on interest rates.
Jesús?
No, absolutely. The interest rate environment is a struggle, is a challenge. We're talking 6.5% to 8%, depending on the type of loan we take out. So that reduces the number of units. That makes the project less feasible. Talking about height, Sean, we are capped at 4 to 6 stories half the time, more than often half the time. That height, when you go above 7, you start getting hit with higher wage requirements, which I'm not sure that I'm the person that would advocate for lower wages for the same type of folks that we build housing for. That seems counterproductive to me.
Right.
I'm talking about prevailing wage. I sometimes joke to the banking community is that we bailed them out multiple times, but they're not giving us any benefits when it comes to interest rates. But, you know, they're not worth to have that discussion, right? So, there's a lot we can't control, that's for sure. But there are things we can control that Denny mentioned earlier, you know, bond measures, that's there. Like how important is the work that we do? I think we spend the money on what's important. I think we're not doing that right now, and we can control that. These are all person-made issues I think we could undo.
Well, it's a priority for us. And there's a measure on the statewide ballot, sponsored by the California Business Roundtable, that will take away from us any opportunity to approve public dollars with a majority vote. It'll make everything a 2/3 vote again. And you know, I think that's really regrettable. That's intentionally a strategy to deny the public sector the resources it needs to address these challenges. And we should all, I think, object to that and vote against it, work against it. We are. And then again, there's a measure on the ballot in LA County that I think you should all support if you think that building affordable housing is an important objective. So, you know, the politics of this is really what is most pregnant, I think. The most challenging and difficult part of it is the contending political forces. In California, though, I think the challenges were created by an earlier generation, frankly. I mean, Prop 13, which, you know, the public sector used to rely heavily upon property taxes. And it was important to lower property taxes for homeowners, but Prop 13 lowered property taxes for all, including the richest, largest, and most successful sectors of the economy, and the commercial sectors and the multifamily residential sectors, et cetera. And it made it, I think, increasingly hard for local and state governments to operate effectively. And then the 2/3 requirement was simply another barrier. So, you know, I'm hoping we get back to democracy in California, and we'll see a new day, if you will, for our communities if we get back to democracy.
But democracy produced Prop 13, whatever one thinks about it, because
I mean,
California's democratic system.
I will say majority vote. Let's get back to majority vote.
Majority vote.
I think, even in a democracy, you can fool the voters. But some of the
No, I had no idea. Sue.
Yeah, I want to bring it back to the people because I, like Denny, I know everybody loves talking about buildings and how tall and all of this, but back to the people and what the effect of all of the new construction and the vacancy decontrol has. One thing we know from our rent control board report is that unlike you, Frances, who have been here for 25 years maybe in the same apartment?
No, I had rent control for a few years, and I moved within the same building into a unit that had subject to vacancy decontrol.
Oh, so it was vacancy decontrol?
Yeah, so
when
I
you
moved
in?
into a market that went back to market rate, huge jump.
Because what we're seeing, according to the rent control board report, is a turnover every 2 to 3 years in the vacancy deed, right? That's correct.
Well, I don't do that. I'm new projects. I'm not the old
But in
project.
the new projects as well.
Yeah,
How
but
many
the-
years are I know people who started new projects and end up in rent control.
Oh, no, and yeah, in fact, I have employees who work for me who make too much money, who are in rent control properties. They're crowding out people who should be in rent control properties. And my thesis is we're not building new stuff for them. So they have no alternative but to, so I'm sorry.
Well, and
I
they don't
don't
mean
mean
to
to interrupt
trouble
you
them.
because the point I'm making is a little different. The one place that people can afford to stay for long periods of time that remain affordable to them are affordable housing.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
That is the one thing that we can do as a society to take care of the people who basically, for those of us who are wealthier, who live in single-family homes, who are serving us. Because that's what we're talking about. We're living in a beach community with a lot of very wealthy people. I saw the income charts, who require a high level of services. We're talking about tourists who come here who require a high level of services. We're talking about fancy buildings require high level of services from people who are making low wages. And if we aren't providing housing for them, and 10% is not going to do it, what are we going to do? What are they going to do? What are our older people who are on fixed incomes going to do? So this is why I've always done what I do. But what I want to talk about is what the impact of all of this new market rate housing is going to have on our population in Santa Monica, and whether we are making the appropriate provisions, I don't believe we are, to create the kind of housing we need for the people we need to serve us, so to speak.
Oh, I think that's really been the topic of most of this conversation. We spent about 10 minutes on the physical piece. Primarily, this was about affordability. I would argue that that's exactly what Jesús laid out very clearly, was why he's dedicated to doing the work with the community corps. But I think what Denny made very clear is that, or perhaps Jesús, was that currently the funding isn't there. The funding isn't there. It's not coming from the city in the way that it used to do. It's not coming from the state. The state gave us these RENA numbers, 9,000, but didn't provide any funds to build them. I think nobody on this panel disagrees that affordability is the issue. However, this show that this conversation is in conjunction with, yes, it's about affordability, but it isn't the only. One cannot, that is obviously incredibly important, but there are other dimensions to the city we live in. I personally would argue they're worth talking about. I really would. One of the reasons why people in R1 zones, for example, have fought against upzoning for so long, which arguably could be a way to gently densify the whole region, but because they wanted to cling on, hold on to what is a very bucolic and pleasant way of life. It is what people have come to this region for, and it is indisputably very, very appealing. So appeal, allure, the physical environment is part of the story of Santa Monica. And I think it is completely legitimate to talk about that too.
I'm not claiming that it's not legitimate to talk about it. What I am saying is between the jobs, housing imbalance that we have here, and the kinds of the small amount of affordable housing that we're providing right now, despite the numbers that we're required to produce, how we are going to have a balanced city where people live where they work, they can walk to their work, and we don't only have, right now, the median family income, which is different than the median household income, is about, last time I looked, it was $175,000. So this creates a whole different kind of society, in a sense, in the city than we had when people were living in their apartments for 20 years. I'm just saying that we have a lot more mobility. I have kids this age who lived in flex ones with 3 other people. That's a New York thing. You have a 1-bedroom unit with 3 girls or 4 girls living in it, right? This is what I think we're going to see in this housing along Lincoln. Now, I think Lincoln is a place for it personally, but I'm worried that we aren't being visionary about our other needs and maybe balancing rent control and affordable, this sort of thing.
Well, balancing rent control and affordability and the missing middle, because the problem is the households are being gouged out. We are on track to become a gerontocracy if we do not take care of the younger households. Many of the projects on Lincoln, at least according to you, Jing, you said the state intervention means you can no longer control the unit size, which I presume means that one might wind up with far more studios than, say, family apartments, that one might want to have a more balanced society where you are able to stabilize the numbers in the school district. You can have people who work here, play here, put their kids in school here. That's what Santa Monica used to do. Okay, so I'm going to throw out a question. So right now, back to you, Sue.
So I want to ask you a question on this. Why do developers want to build more studios than 2 bedrooms?
I mean, you guys, I think they can.
Money.
Yeah, I think that's the reality is, I think I get asked that question a lot, is that, they wouldn't build it if it didn't make money. right? I mean, it has to make money.
And they're in the business, they take the risk,
Well,
they get the
But the
Well,
city,
it's also
but
very-
the city does have unit mix requirements.
Which can be
Yes, the
waived.
city does have the
Under
units
state.
requirements, but that's why I do come back to the state law is, it's just overtaking everything. So that is something that, you know, can override, the city's local unit mix requirements. So that, you know, we do have like minimum number of 2 and 3 bedrooms with the desire to accommodate families, but in reality, if you think about a market rate 3-bedroom unit, what family can afford, you know, what the going rate would be for that, you know, that's not a reasonable ask. And so, you know, one of the new tools, I guess, we enacted through the housing element was this idea of a moderate income housing overlay. You know, when you talk about that missing middle, I think of not even beyond the 120% above area median income. A conversation we've had in the city in the past has been about like sort of defining what workforce housing, so that people who make sort of too much money to be deed restricted, you know, affordable, but they don't make $1 million a year. You know, and those are the folks that are kind of, you know, paying 60% of their income, 70, you know, this is when I first came to the city, I was shocked by the rents, you know. And any young person who's come to the city goes through that same thing. I'm like, I can't live here, you know, I don't even know if I can continue to be here, you know, in the future. And I know a lot of, you know, our like friends with young kids, you know, everyone ends up moving to the Valley or east or wherever else. It's out of Santa Monica. And you see the impact of that, you know, in the school system. But I think broadly you see it, you know, it's an economic development issue because we have businesses here, restaurants can't staff, you know, their businesses. We have retailers that can't have enough staff. I mean, it's a problem, you know, when you don't have housing at sort of those levels, but also, you know, even what you might consider like white collar jobs, you know, they simply cannot afford to live here anymore. It's getting increasingly out of reach, even for people who are making, you know, sort of that above moderate salary.
Right. And so one gets right back to the question of sort of constraining supply or limiting cash support from state or from local. But I do want to just pose the question back to you, Sue, in terms of sort of a radical solution. You know, right now, a lot of people in housing are very, very curious at what's going at the Vienna model. The Vienna model that derives from Red Vienna back in the 1920s, which has led to a way of living where some 60% of Viennese people live in government sort of owned or maintained housing. And there's a lot of kind of perhaps almost yearning that we could perhaps do that sort of at that scale in LA. And certainly in LA, they're looking around at their surplus land and wondering, you know, is there a way in which perhaps they could use this surplus land to build at scale? Well, here in Santa Monica, just hypothetically, we have a great big piece of land that is going to be the decommissioned airport. What would you say
Don't ask
in
me.
an ideal world? What would you say about turning that into a large community of housing?
Well, so look, I think the way, I understand people here fought for the airport. There's now a group of people who want to turn the airport into a big transpo hub and keep it an airport, right? I mean, housing people, right? And I've seen other things. I think that there is a way to do the airport where people could be happy. I've talked to Tara about it, right? We have Bundy Drive. If you took 200 feet back from Bundy Drive, that's about 12 acres, right? If you just all along there where, right, it's about 12 acres of land. The normal lot here is 150, I said 200. Jing can tell me that it should be a different number. You know, because I'm talking about building hotels, housing, everything along there, but leaving the rest of it, because I'm trying to honor the community vision. So I think that there's a way to do this where everybody can kind of get what they want. And I think that we don't think about that. Everybody wants everything. People don't think, well, I'm gonna have this and you can have that, and I think people are bad at sharing and bad at, I do. Well, look at our financial situation now. I mean, look at the complete crazy top and bottom and think, you know, I mean, so apart from that, I think there's a way to do the airport where a lot of needs can be accommodated, but everybody digs in their heels and says, no, it has to be this, no, it has to be that, it can only be this, and you have to do this here, and you have to.
I want to say that I think it's really early in the process to be describing anybody as digging in their heels.
You're right.
You know, I mean, there are certainly people who say, I want a park. And there are people who say, have other agendas, affordable housing. And I think that you're right, that there is enough land there to do a really good job of each of multiple kinds of goals here. And I don't see anybody.
Come and build a casino on it, and then we lose it all.
But the point is,
I don't see anybody digging their heels in yet. This is a process that's really just started. So let's be aspirational in the way that you suggest. Not everything belongs there. That casino does not belong there. And that airport does not
So
belong
talk to Sydney Cobbler, because she's trying to get them on.
Yeah,
Seriously.
but that's not the only vacant land available in Santa Monica.
So
So there's a whole separate process, underway for the airport. There are voter measures, that have to be dealt with.
I understand.
But there is another issue that we haven't talked about more generally, and that has to do with the price of land in Santa Monica.
Yep.
Community corporation has to compete with Cypress equities for the same properties in order to develop them. But the city does control a lot of other property in Santa Monica that has been carefully inventoried by Jing and her staff in the housing element that should also be looked at for affordable housing development.
And that's
Whose
happening,
idea was that? I'm sorry.
and that's happening. And that's happening currently. The city's releasing sites, city-owned sites that we compete for and are going after, and so that's absolutely one other
And
avenue
that was
for us.
something that we
Yeah.
pushed
Yeah.
hard against, people were very opposed, Jing, true. People are opposed to this dedication of public land for affordable housing, but this is
Some
all we
people-
have to give
some
right now.
people.
This is all we have, well, right, I get that, but this is what.
But it's a larger issue than just the airport.
No, I do
There are many opportunities around the city to look at, using publicly owned land, to support a variety of mixed income housing, either affordable or moderate income housing. And, a lot more creative thought needs to be put to how to make that happen.
But even having good land doesn't mean you're very far if you don't have public dollars to invest. So the ability to generate public dollars through in California, that's going to all be voter approved. Now, it might be a majority vote, which is much easier to win, but there is no real resource yet available that doesn't require voter approval, unless even Sacramento has to get voter approval for bonds and the like. And there's talk about a housing bond on the ballot this time. So yes, land is a big part, but we have to solve the problem of adequate public resources if we're going to have an adequate supply of housing for people who are low income. That's really, and we should be aggressively protecting what we do have through our rent control systems. But I think, Justice for Renters Act is a big piece of the solution here because, there was 111,000 low-income units lost in the city of Los Angeles, according to their housing element, in the last decade.
does
Right.
Justice for Renters have a piece that wants to constrain development close to the coast?
No,
Doesn't it already? I thought already some democratic.
that's what they say.
Yeah.
All it says is that there's no vacancy control, and local jurisdictions can re-implement rent control, because right now they can't.
Well, Justice for Renters Act has three main provisions. One is, it's a repeal of Costa-Hawkins. Costa-Hawkins has three provisions.
Right.
And they have to do with exemptions for single-family homes and exemptions for new construction. But the core thing that really affects renters and affordability of housing is the vacancy decontrol. And that's, that vacancy decontrol is a hemorrhage on affordable housing, on existing stock of affordable housing. And that's our cheapest housing we could ever have, is to have our existing housing be able to be regulated as affordable. And, so it's on the ballot, we should vote for it.
I thought Republicans in places like Huntington Beach were pretty keen on the Justice for Renters Act as well, which sort of makes one smell a rat.
Yeah, well, there was some crackpot politician who, excuse me, did I let my opinion out? Who suggested they might use rent control on new construction as a way of blocking new construction, right? I don't think that that's going to last or go far. It was a kind of idle threat that I think frightened some in the legislature, and it's unfortunate, but that's the cornerstone here. Whether the Justice for Renters Act passes or fails, that challenge will still be before us because the law, Costa-Hawkins, will still be law, and we need to have a strategy that takes vacancy control off the table and makes that a matter of local management.
Do you believe in means testing for
No.
renters?
For his housing, yes, not for rent control housing, no.
Again, one could have a long conversation about rent control. I mean, you yourself referred to.
If you means test rent control housing, it will mean property owners will only rent to higher income people.
Just as they do now in affordable housing, they take the higher ranking
yeah.
people. So you understand that.
Oh yeah, totally. I think we're still sort of running on actually. I think, here we go. We're 3 minutes past our finish time.
I wanted to go back and correct a little bit. I have the numbers that I was using earlier about production in Santa Monica.
Numbers, everyone? Numbers?
Well, it's because there's a very false characterization that Santa Monica is not really having a major spurt of growth in its development. It is having an extraordinary spurt of growth in development right now. I mean, there are, yes, 6,700 units that were built since 95 to 23, but since 23, there's about 2,200 that are under construction or approved, and there's more than 3,000 in the application pipeline.
Market rate.
Beg pardon?
Are they market rate?
Well, they all have some
They
including
have
requirements.
10 to 15%.
And 2,200 of those could be Bruce's.
Yeah,
He's doing 2,200.
right, there are, and since Measure GS was on the ballot, there's been about 3,000 units applied for. Now, that's not discouraging development. I'm sorry. We've had 3,000 units submitted since that time.
That's
So
why
your point- your
that's
point
why
being that
we're a state certified pro-housing city, right, Jing?
But what-
I mean, I guess just sort of as, I think one thing I've seen over the years is, what gets applied for doesn't necessarily actually get built. I mean, from the time a project is approved, it's probably 2 to 3 years before we see, some projects just die, like they go away and they never come back, or they have like 4 different applications that go through on them.
So in the last
So-
4 or 5, 3 or 4 years, have we had, hasn't there been a greater share of applications that actually gone through the construction?
We've definitely seen like a jump in it, but I would say overall, when we clump together under construction and approved, the greater share of that might be the improved or pending, like under review or they apply for. Applying for it doesn't, all I'm saying is, what they apply for doesn't necessarily actually make it to completion. That's, and we've definitely seen, especially through COVID, the city provided COVID relief. We added an extra 2 years, we gave people an extra 2 years across the board to complete their projects because everything just stopped. And this was just, even single family home construction, remodels, all that kind of thing. So everyone got the same break across the board. I will say we're not seeing sort of like the new starts in terms of new building permits for new construction. What those were projects that were approved probably 4 years ago, right? But the ones that have been approved recently, they're still going through the process, and we're not necessarily really seeing the same rate of building permit issuance for the projects as we were seeing in the prior.
All right, but the numbers I just gave you are for 1 year. June 23, we're at June 24. In that 1 year, There are 2,200 that are under construction and approved, and another 3,000 that have been applied for. If half of the applied for go away, which is probably a very high rate of failure, then we will have close to 4,000 units attributable to this year. Whereas we had 6,700 attributable to the prior 30 years. So 6,700 over 30 years compared to 4,000 plus in 1 year. This is a construction boom.
But isn't it also going back to what Bruce pointed out on his chart, this chart in fact, isn't it recalibrate, sort of getting back to the kind of growth that we used to have up until the 80s, where it was typical to have these surges. And then they got constrained with downzoning and a lot of pushback against construction, and now we've bounced back. Are you saying it's a bad thing that we've got all this development now because not enough of it is affordable, too much of it is market rate, plus there's just too much?
That is what I believe, yes. I mean, I think we have too little affordable in that mix, much too little affordable. I think that there's a gentrifying effect in the community as a whole, not just on housing prices, but on costs for multiple items, restaurants, etc. As our income of our community, as the average or median incomes grows, and it's growing dramatically, the cost of many things go up because demand goes up. There's more money in play to pull up the prices of all goods and stuff. That makes it increasingly hard for low-income people who live here to continue to live here.
Yeah, I think that's most definitely something that was an establishing point at the beginning of the conversation most people agree on. I do have a question though about economic development and housing, which is, to what extent are the two connected? As in, a company wants to come into Santa Monica and they're going to be, paying pretty, maybe reasonably good salaries, but not good enough for people to actually afford to be here. Is there a conversation about whether that company should even come into town if they cannot account for housing, for the housing for their employees? For example, like when St. John's Hospital expanded, and there was going to be, a whole load more people coming into work at St. John's Hospital, but I didn't see a conversation about where those people are going to live. Does that conversation happen?
It does.
As part of economic development?
Absolutely, it does. I mean, the hospital is an example. I think you see it. I think we all see it across our school system, even in the preschool levels. These are things, right? That these workers are important. You need them to staff all of. Santa Monica is still very much a service economy. Even though we have a fairly diverse economic sector, I mean, we are very service-oriented, very tourist-driven economy. So we have a lot of low-wage workers that drive into the city every day. We have like 90,000 of them drive in. That staff the hotels, the restaurants, the retails, all of the visitor-serving businesses, across the whole city. And there is not enough housing in the city to accommodate all of them. Never mind Santa Monica, West LA, the region. They're driving as far as Lancaster, Palmdale, to do their job. And at some point, someone's got to think this is not worth it anymore. Especially as wages have increased and it makes it possible for them to live closer to where they work. Right, people will make that choice. And ultimately, what we have seen definitely is businesses have left the city. Because that labor pool simply isn't there, and it's not just the service industry. It's companies that are like, this is our workers don't live here anymore, or they simply don't need the office space because they can afford it.
So again, it's time to wrap this up. We can have another 15 minutes on sort of whether the school district should be putting more of its pool of money into housing for its workers, rather than perhaps $30 million on air conditioning or whatever it was. The choices that it makes choices. is it making the right choices right now? And is that the kind of a conversation that we should be having in Santa Monica?
Well, the college put a bond measure on the ballot and included that the funding could be used for affordable housing, principally for students. But they could also do that for staff. And so could the school district. If the voters agree to it, it could be done. But it has to be approved by the voters in California. That's our, defining characteristic as a political system, is that everything that involves money, virtually everything, has to be voted on. And if CBRT passes, it'll all be 2/3. Then try to get some new money for additional needs.
Well, with that optimistic note.
I actually am optimistic because the polling on that measure shows it going down.
There we go.
Well, not only that, I think the Supreme Court's gonna take it off the ballot. That's my prediction, so let's see if I'm true.
Fingers
If I believed in God, I would say.
I really believe it. I'm ready.
Well, Jesús, Denny,